Hello, everyone. Welcome you all to my talk, Test Data, the Key to Effective Test Coverage. My name is Ashok, and I'm an engineering leader with TransUnion. I have extensive experience in quality assurance and engineering, and I've been with the testing world for close to 2 decades now. My area of interest within testing was around test strategy, leadership, automation, and customer advocacy. In this atomic talk, I will be talking through our team's journey with test data creation, management, preserving, and reusing across multiple different agile teams. I will also talk through the challenges that we went through in this journey and possible solutions that have worked well for us. Test data is typically required for the following reasons. It's primarily needed for increasing the coverage of testing itself, because there are certain specific types of data that is required to activate specific areas within the application code base. And the more the combinations of the data that we use, the more is the chances of increasing the coverage of testing itself. And a direct outcome of this is the more the probability or increase in the coverage of testing, the more is the chances of identifying and unearthing bugs, which I think is also one of the key objective of testing itself. The other need for test data is actually to mimic the actions of the end user or the customer on the application. So any software system typically has an end user interacting with it, and the end user interacts with the software system via the test data. So basically, the test data helps the end user to mimic his actions on the software applications. And the fourth and final need is around automation and non-functional testing, where huge volumes of data might be required to simulate load on the system. Or for automation testing, there can be multiple data records that need to be generated automatically in volumes as well. And there can be different techniques that need to be employed within our test data management framework to actually create and automate such voluminous data. Typically, there are two broad categories of data that is used within our testing environments. One is a synthetic data, which is data that is created algorithmically by following specific rules or by navigating specific steps within the application under test. And the synthetic data can be either created manually or through automated scripts or test data generators that are readily available in the market. The other less frequently used type of data is the production data itself. While there are many advantages of using production data within for testing, there can also be the risk of exposing PII information into the lower environments. And with the right controls in place, I think using production data can also be a very effective testing lever, because there can be certain specific scenarios or defects that exist in the production environment, which cannot be replicated with synthetic data or mass data that is available usually in the lower environments. And for those reasons, we need production data itself to better replicate the issue, which will help our developers also to identify the root cause of problems and fix them. In my experience working with multiple different teams in the test data space, I've repeatedly seen the following challenges exist in some way or form across the different teams and different organizations that I've been part of. And I will be deep diving into each of these challenges. The first one being in an agile sprint, it is always testing is pushed into the fag end of the sprint. And there is always a situation wherein huge volumes of data might be required in very short sprints of time. And if the testing itself is pushed to the end of the sprint, the teams cannot afford to spend more time in creating test data itself. And spending more time on test data will actually push the testing timelines further. The next challenge is around again around agile teams being becoming much more siloed as they mature in their agile structure. What we have noticed is teams start creating this data individually within their own agile teams, and there is multiple duplicate records of data existing for the same data scenario within the environment itself. The third challenge is actually an anti-pattern of the second challenge, whereby while data is required to be shared across multiple different teams, there are specific scenarios or instances where data needs to be exclusively accessible to one particular team for a specified time period. This is because certain data records are mutable data records, which means that let's say that, for example, there is a customer record with an account balance on it, and this account balance is a mutable attribute of that customer record itself. And one particular team, let's say that team A, wants to use the customer record with a specific account balance on it. And if the same data record is picked by another team as well for their testing, and they put some transactions onto that account, the problem that will happen is that the account balance will change, and this will negatively impact the testing that is being done by team A. And this results in inconsistent test results across the teams. The other challenge is around manually creating data, which is very time consuming and error prone, and is also people dependent. And as I've spoken about in the first challenge, teams are often pushed to complete their testing within the end of the sprint, and manually creating data will actually add fuel to the fire and is not solving the problem. The final challenge that I've seen teams go through is around how do we enable our third-party downstream vendors and partners to actually interface into our existing TDM systems, if any, and access the data that are created by upstream systems. Typically, all of our software systems are end-to-end systems, where data is created in an upstream system and it is pushed into the downstream system for further processing. So the downstream systems are typically dependent on the upstream systems for access for creating the data for them. And there needs to be a safe and secure manner wherein the downstream systems, specifically those systems, are being managed by external third-party vendors and partners to have access into the TDM system to extract the data that is created from the upstream system. So now that we've talked about all of the challenges that teams typically go through with their test data journey, I also wanted to talk about our success story with test data. And this success story, I wanted to equate it to the Tuckman's theory of group development. And when we started initially, which is the forming stage of Tuckman, test data was manually created. And because it was manually created, we noticed that teams started becoming a lot more of people dependent. This whole test data activity itself was a lot more of people dependent, because there were specific people needed to create or needed to be present to create specific types of data. And because it is manually created and people dependent, this data creation itself was a lot more error prone. And also, since we did not have a central way of accessing and managing this data, teams started duplicating the data scenarios within their own silos. And this resulted in a number of duplicates, data records being created within the environment itself. This stage resulted in a stage called storming, wherein there was a lot of breakdown and collaboration across the teams. And because the data was being duplicated across teams, there was a lot of rework in the test data creation effort itself. And also, since there was no way of centrally managing the data and reserving the data for exclusive access of specific teams, there is a lot of inconsistencies in the test results itself. And this can be equated to a stage called storming as per Tuckman's theory. We then moved on into a stage called norming, whereby our TDM framework was established, and we implemented this TDM framework across a pilot set of teams. And before we implemented, we also ensured that we measured the baseline velocity of these pilot teams, which helped it to actually track the progress and the success of this TDM implementation. Once we piloted our TDM framework, we moved into a much more stable state called performing, and we noticed that the velocity of the teams with the TDM implementation drastically increased. And this is because there was no duplication of data across the teams, and teams were able to actually reuse a number of data rather than recreating them every time. And because we had a central framework for managing test data, that had the capability, or that provided the capability for teams to reserve data for their exclusive access. We noticed that the test results that were being generated within the teams were a lot more consistent. And overall, all of these actually attributed to the increase in velocity. And finally, we moved into a state of steady state, and whereby we implemented the TDM process across all of our agile teams. Overall, there was a increase in velocity of 30% across the teams. And because there was no rework of test data, and teams were able to centrally manage and reserve the data, the overall happiness index of the teams actually increased. And we were also able to provide a safe and secure manner by which our third-party partners were also able to access our data through APIs. This is a reference architecture that I have come up based on my long experience with test data with multiple teams and multiple different organizations. So it's not a one-stop solution. There are different plug-and-play components that I have included in this architecture, and this is a set of Lego blocks that have been assembled based on my experience across the different teams I've worked with. The left side of the architecture is basically the test data generation layer, where test data is either generated synthetically via our automation tools or our test data generators, or we can use production data itself. And in certain organizations where we had existing test automation scripts, we have repurposed them into test data creation scripts and use them for this activity. And in certain organizations where we did not have ready-made test automation scripts, but we had test data generators already within the tool stack, we directly reuse them. And the data that is created through each of these layers here are pushed into their own databases, and this is then accessed in a front-end UI application centrally via an API layer. Now, this front-end UI application is a central point of data access, where each of the data requesters. So the right side of the architecture is the data requester layer, and in this particular slide, I have called them out as agile teams, but it need not be one agile team itself, but it can be an individual also who needs the data. So each of the data requester here, based on the data scenario that they require, will have to go into that front-end application and key in their specific, or select their particular data scenario. And based on their selection or the data scenario request, the front-end application will pull the specific data record that matches their specific data scenario. And from the matches that are shown on the front-end screen, the data requester can select specific data records and reserve them for their exclusive access. Now, once a data record is exclusively reserved for a particular data requester, it is locked for that particular data requester for a specified timeout period. And this timeout period is set as a global timeout variable on the framework itself. And after the timeout is reached, the data record is released back to the data pool, so that it becomes reusable for another data requester who might have had the same data scenario. And by this, we ensure that while teams are able to reuse data across teams, they are also able to reserve for exclusive access. The API layer that I've shown here is a key for our third-party partners and vendors to gain access into our TDM systems and retrieve the data that they want in a safe and secure manner. This is about test data. Thank you for this opportunity, and enjoy the conference. Thank you.